Hi everyone, welcome to this very special episode of The Cutting Room, created for and voted by our Patreon supporters. My name is Luke, and with me are the Doppelganger Special of Westy and Matt.
Hello.
Hello.
This is part 2 of our episode on The Truman Show, where we're talking about the writing and the great cast. You can get the other parts here. First up, we're covering the writing.
The Truman Show was written by Andrew Niccol. He wrote a one-page treatment in 1991 and sold it for around $1 million, with the idea that he would also direct. But the projected budget of $60 million didn't sit well with the studio bigwigs, who decided that a more experienced director should come on board, and that's when Talk of Brian De Palma started, and Niccol was given some set-aside money to just be the writer.
The best kind of money.
Mm-hmm. Why not?
Yeah, less work, more wedge.
Yeah. Originally, the script had a more sci-fi thriller edge and was set in an artificial New York. I mean, that would have worked for me, of course.
Of course.
And the changes to the script were still being made while waiting for Jim Carrey to sign on. There were more than 20 rewrites in total.
Yeah.
A big number. Big changes.
Yeah.
So, Westy, coming to you first. Andrew Niccol's screenplay.
Andrew Niccol's screenplay is like a Philip K. Dick novel. It just seems to be well ahead of its time. And to watch it now, it almost seems kind of Stone Age in its approach. But back then, in 98, you were like, no.
Revelatory.
No way. It was ridiculous to think that this could possibly be a thing where they could create a world and someone would be so lost in it that they just forget what reality actually is. And he's with the way that he writes reality as well, the way they're so obsessed with what they see and that they don't experience reality themselves. So everyone in themselves bases their life on someone who doesn't know what their life is about, which is just madness. But the way things are now, I guess, social media, the rise of reality television. Big Brother came out in 99, which was a year after this. At the time, you're just going, if this is true, this will be ridiculous. The amount of things they could do with this, how many people they could influence and how much they could change the world for the better with all the positive things they could put into something like this. And it's just as negative as The Truman Show. And he's absolutely right. It is, though. It just taps into that human emotion. Totally. And you have to feed that. The script itself shows how archaic what people depict as normal life is. Meet somebody in high school, buy a house, get married, have kids, get a job. That's what you do. End of story. And then they were going to, carry this on, and there was a few rewrites, and they're going to have Truman's child because she pushes so hard to have a baby, and then the child was going to be on the next channel, and they were going to run it like a duality thing. Right. And then when Truman dies, and then his son takes over, and just have this on a consistent loop, which is so disgusting.
Frightening.
Like really, really frightening. But at the same time, you would kind of go, yeah, that's feasible now. A few things touched on it, the whole reality TV show. I mean, there's like The Running Man, which had that kind of vibe to it, but it was so heightened in its idea, it was totally unbelievable. But from a writing point of view, I think he's great.
And Matt, what about you? Andrew Niccol screenplay.
Yeah, such a good idea. So prescient. And
one of the biggest trends, probably the biggest TV trend of the last 25 years.
Yep. Easily. Yeah. Yep. And how many times you watch this and then not thought, you've just had that day where you kind of think and you look around and you go, am I Truman Burbank today? There's that paranoia. It's still there.
Yeah. And as well, I think it's interesting, this comes out around about roughly the same time as The Matrix, because those films ask the same question. What is reality? Do you believe everything around you? But they ask those questions in very different ways. But what I want to talk about is the darkness that's inherently in this idea. And I do think it ties in with Wee's direction of it, because I find it really interesting when you get to the end, and we're going to talk about the end in a bit more detail later, but it's presented as a triumph, Truman making his way into the real world. Because, and I don't mean this as a criticism at all, but I think there is a much darker version of this story out there, which would have been interesting to see. Because for a start, mentally, Truman is surely in a place where he's never going to recover. How is he ever going to trust anyone? And also the thing is, like, life in the outside world, if he does get there, that is going to be completely fucked for him, because he's the most famous person on the planet. He's not going to get a minute's peace.
Exactly.
Which I think maybe doesn't get truly acknowledged in the way that it ends, because what comes to mind, and like Westy, you're going to love this, Luke, you're going to hate it, but what comes to mind is Brazil, the Gilliam film. Because the thing at the ending there, you've got an ending that plays like a happy ending. Jonathan Pryce, he's escaped, he's in the country, until you realise, no, he's lobotomized, and that's all in his head. Yeah. And I just wonder how it would have played if Truman had elected to stay in Sea Haven, because that's where he's safe. That's why I know. So I just think that would have been an interesting place to take it, because, I mean, you mentioned about 20 rewrites, and I know that at one point, and there were a lot of darker elements in early versions, at one point, in one earlier draft, there's a scene where Truman runs out onto the street because he's basically going insane, sees a woman with a pram, he grabs the baby, and he basically threatens to throw the baby to the ground unless somebody tells him what's going on.
Dear me.
Which, you know, I would have liked to have seen that version of the film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think the writing is great. I know it sounds like I'm down on it, and I'm not. It's just there's a darker version of this film, and I would have really liked to see how that idea played out.
There's definitely a darker version of this film that I would love to have seen.
Yeah,
there is, but there's no way that Paramount, a major studio,
oh no, I know why they went in the direction they did. Yeah, of course.
Well, yeah, well, that's obvious, but I mean, it's still better.
Well, opinions vary. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely horrendous. Truman's been a pawn in this global game. You've mentioned it. Everybody's in on it. Watch Out's loud and clear is the theme, the satire of media. The film really holds up a mirror to the way that TV is presented and consumed. And it's not just the TV execs, but everybody at home. Nobody's hands are clean when you consider the circumstances, because everybody's in on it.
Yeah.
And Truman is put through horrendous traumatic events like the drowning of his dad. It is to keep him from leaving town, but also that kind of storyline is catnip for TV viewers. People have been tuning in their millions.
Yeah.
So not only is Truman being manipulated, the audience are. We get those shots of the people in the bar, the old ladies with their embroidered cushions, and the guy who's always in the bath. There is a point where we see far too much of his flesh on show for my taste when he's hanging on. It's disgusting. I think it would have been a bit more interesting to show a bit more of the opposition to the TV show. Sylvia really is the only person to show disapproval of the Truman Show. And I really like the moments where things go wrong on set and people infiltrate it. So a bit more of that wouldn't have gone amiss for me.
Yeah.
And the theme of media satire isn't presented very subtly, but then it's not supposed to be. But it's something that is absolutely still relevant now, maybe even more so 24 years on. So from that point, great writing for me. Really, really interesting concept and well executed.
Yeah.
So very good writing by Niccol, who fills the film with a good dollop of social commentary and some biting satire.
Yeah,
absolutely.
A good supporting cast with Carrey's central performance being the main draw. I'm starting us off by talking about the main man, Jim Rubberface Carrey.
It's official
yes,
middle
indeed.
name.
I mean, this was a big departure, like you mentioned, Westy, following his 90s comedy gold run, Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Lion Liar, The Cable Guy, although that one is very much darker in tone, it's still Carrey at his wackiest, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then this, he's still his oddball self at the start. He's almost boneless the way he bends and snakes around town. Yeah. But the shift from that lovable goofball to this really tortured soul who's harbouring the trauma of his dad's death, the one that got away in Sylvia, and his own designs to flee, but he can't because of his fear of water, all really played well by Jim Carrey. A very pleasantly surprising display of his range, I think. Yeah. I like the way that he hides his frustration at being blocked at every turn behind a smile. Like when he's at the travel agency who tells him he'll have to wait a month for his flight to Fiji, and he just smiles and says,
"I'll make other arrangements." Okay.
But really, he's furious.
Yeah.
But because he's a sweet man at heart, and I really love the stretch after he meets his dad and things are seemingly back to normal. Then the producers and the audience are all caught by Truman's game. But he's smarter than them, and I love when he finds the courage and inner strength to conquer his demons and skedaddle. He makes a run for it. Great. The reason he's able to do that is because he gave his dad the camera ring back, so it's not easy to track his whereabouts. Really good writing that.
Brilliant.
We had his heart set on Carrey after seeing him in Ace Ventura, which I don't necessarily think screams social commentary and comedy drama. But
I would have said if you'd seen him in The Cable Guy and the way he was talking about television in that, and you've got to kill the babysitter and all that kind of darker tone, then fair enough. But Ace Ventura won.
One.
Talking out of his arse.
Talking out of his arse, yeah.
I mean, the second one's not. The second one's hardly fucking Citizen Kane, is it? I don't know. I said one.
No, I don't know. So.
Comes out the arse of a rhino. Oh, there's the guy.
That's the guy for me.
That's the guy.
When Carrey did sign on, Paramount execs pushed for a change in tone to his more wackier brand of comedy, which is the direct opposite thing of what he wanted to do. He reduced his fee to be part of the film. but as a trade-off, he was given control and being able to ad-lib his lines, which Peter Weir didn't like. They butted heads for the first few days until Carrey ad-libbed that soap space suit on the bathroom mirror, Trumania. Weir lapped that up.
Yeah, Trumania.
Loved it. Funny when he gets thrown out of Omicron and he takes out his frustration on the guy who's on the ladder outside. He hits a briefcase on his ass.
Yeah.
I'm certain that would have been an ad-lib.
Yeah.
Certain.
And keeps looking over his shoulder as he's running away, thinking he's going to chase him.
And the guy doesn't react.
Doesn't react at all.
Great. So he's one of the main reasons that I didn't come back to the film, but he exceeded my expectations this time around. Shows some really great range and all of those great reactions when everything in town seems to not quite fit. I think that's really, really good. Great performance.
Yeah.
Westy, who are you going for?
I'm going to go for my favourite in the film, and my favourite in a lot of films.
Sure.
Mr. Ed Harris.
Mr. Ed Harris
is fantastic in this. He just plays it beautifully, where it's not hammy, it's not over the top, though it is. You know, it's a crease called Christof. He should have this
Christof,
kind of, like this whole horrible kind of thing.
Water ponds.
But you can just tell. I mean, anyone else but Ed Harris putting this emotional weight on this character as if it's his own son. Mm-hmm. And the way he holds the camera on a close-up in this film is better than anyone else I've seen. I mean, if you watch this at the cinema, you've got to hold that close-up and you've got to just go through a range of emotions. The way he's introduced when he does the speech and he's like, that's why we're reading, and the music now, and he's manipulating everything, and he's got all the cameras and he knows what he's doing, he's directing it, and he's kind of there. And there's that incredible interview he has with Harry Shearer when it's like the whole back and forth, and you're a very private person, even though what he's doing is the least private thing in the world. It's just all these kind of this duality to this character, and his outfits are great. You know, that beret that you mentioned, like why?
Tiny glasses.
Because that's the only way you can make him pompous, by dressing him up like that. But his performance,
you're right.
You can't get a pompous performance out of Ed Harris. It's always going to be really legitimate and really heartfelt and really honest. And I think that's what he brings to the film. He plays it beautifully, as if he's in charge of this whole thing. And he's the one who figures out, is he asleep? Is he not? Go on that camera, go on that camera. He can't sleep. It's taken over his life. Yeah. And you kind of feel that was Truman manipulated, or was Christof manipulated by creating this thing? Who's lost most of the life? You know, and he brings that element to it where you kind of go, he needs him to stay because he needs that life. Christof hasn't got a life outside the Truman Show. Neither is Truman.
Yeah, you're right.
And Ed Harris really brings that emotion. And then the end is like really hard. It's really heartfelt for both people. You kind of go, well, neither of them wanted to be there, but they both wanted it to work in some way. And I mean, give it to anyone else but Ed Harris. Nah, it wouldn't have worked. I mean, he's just fantastic in everything I've seen him in.
He did win a Best Supporting Golden Globe for his efforts in this film. He wasn't originally cast as Christof. That was Dennis Hopper, who got fired 2 days into filming. He had it in his contract that if Peter Weir didn't like his performance, he could get rid. He didn't like it, so he did get rid.
I would imagine he would have been like his character in Waterworld, just with a patron just screaming.
This Truman's like a turd that won't flush.
Would have been very Blue Velvet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Gas mask on.
Harris came on at the 11th hour and suggested that Christof be a hunchback, but Peter Weir didn't like that.
Too far. That's too far.
Too much. Too much. Matt, who are you going for?
Well, I'm going to slightly cheat. I'm going to talk about two performances because I can't really divide them. But I think they're both worth talking about because they both illustrate how creepy this film is, because it's Emmerich and Linney, and they're playing the two most important people in Truman's life.
They're a double team anyway.
They're all a double team, but the flat out lie into him about everything as well. And I think they're really clever performances because they're just ever so slightly wooden. They're slightly hammy in that TV reality kind of way, but they never tip over into being actually bad. And I just think that really boggles my mind how they get that tone just right. I mean, I'll talk about Emmerich first. He just has that trustworthy dependability aura, doesn't he? Which is so undercut when you know how deceitful he is in this film. So it's really interesting. Always turning Truman's dreams against him. You know, why would you leave here? There's no way out there as good as this, and I've been out there, all that stuff. But I feel slightly bad for Emmerich because I know, like in his work on this film, he built up a profile in his head of what Marlon was, and he saw him as someone who was quite conflicted about what he's doing, but he's got a drink and a drugs problem in his background, so that's why he's doing this, to get the money to like get him through that. And also another deleted scene, which I don't know if they got around to shooting it, but it was definitely in the script at one point, when Truman goes on the run. Marlon does see him, but he doesn't. He says nothing, and he lets him go.
Yeah,
which does bring a bit of shade in Marlon, and it's a shame we didn't get to see that.
I would have loved that.
What we do get, what we do get from Emmerich, though, really great, really creepy.
Yeah,
interesting. And then you've got Linney as Meryl, who I find her character completely despicable. I mean, she's a brilliant actress. She's
great. I really like her.
But it's mental torture what she's doing to Truman, essentially. And like you mentioned, the separate wives, and I definitely get that in her performance, because she's got this big fixed grin constantly, but it never reaches her eyes. Her eyes are dead in this. And it's kind of danced around, you know, they kind of make a couple of comments about some of the people in the film, but it's worth remembering she has to pretend that marriage is a proper marriage. So essentially she's sleeping with Truman for money, which I think is one of the darker aspects of the film and her character, which kind of only gets slightly touched on. And I think you mentioned the catalogue thing as well, Luke, because that's what Linney did. She went and bought a load of 50s fashion catalogues to study how the models posed. And she brought all that to her performance, and not just in the scenes when, you know, she's sewn off the Coco or the new Dicer, but it's everywhere. That scene when Truman's in the basement, she comes down to talk to him. The way she stands on the stairs, it's a total model pose.
It is. Yeah.
But the more you think about Meryl, or certainly I do, the more abhorrent I think she is a character. And I think her and Emmerich together really give the film that dark edge. And I think they're both really subtle, but really brilliant performances.
Yeah, very much. So Jim Carrey, surrounded by very good support, puts in one of his career best.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely for me, yeah.
And that's all for part 2. We have one final video for you, part 3, where we'll talk about our highlights from The Truman Show. And finally, we'll rate the film out of 10.